Good morning. I'm going to be looking at Habakkuk chapter 1 and verses 5 to 11. In verses 1 to 4 we've had Habakkuk's complaint to God, and in verses 5 to 11 we have his first answer. Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honour. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty men, whose own strength is their God. Habakkuk has cried out to God, how long will this injustice and violence go on? Why do you make me watch this evil? Why do you allow it to happen? And God answers him. Perhaps it's a warning to be careful what you pray for. God is going to use the enemies of God's people to bring judgment on God's people. Habakkuk has asked God why he must look at injustice, but now God says, look, lift your eyes from Judah, look further afield, look at the nations and watch. Be amazed at what I will do, God says. Habakkuk is hoping for an end to the violence in Judah as he hears God start to speak. Something amazing in my days, like the rescue from Egypt. Sadly for him, it is more like the exile of the northern kingdom of Israel under the Assyrians. See how God describes the nation Habakkuk is called to look at. A ruthless and impetuous people who take what doesn't belong to them, verse 6. They are a law to themselves. They pay no attention to God's law or any other law. Instead of honouring God, who should be honoured and glorified, they promote their own honour, like the people who built the Tower of Babel. Habakkuk has been complaining to God about the violence in Judah, but the Babylonians come bent on violence. Instead of Abraham's descendants being like sand, the Babylonians gather prisoners like sand. Kings, rulers, fortified cities, all are scoffed at and taken. They sweep all before them. This is an evil empire where might is right. It's not clear at this stage what Habakkuk knows from this prophecy. But he's asked for God to judge violence. God has pointed him to a more violent people. Habakkuk would have known what had happened to the northern kingdom. He would have heard about the rise of the Babylonian Empire. Were the Babylonians coming to exact the same justice on Israel? What is God saying in these verses? One thing we learn is that God is in control of history. He is in control of nations and empires. They are in his hands. He can use a guilty people for his purposes. Habakkuk may fear what is about to happen, but he doesn't need to fear fear that God has lost control, that God is impotent in the face of the Babylonian army. God is in control. And isn't that a lesson that we need to hear as well? We may not be facing an evil empire, although there are many evil governments around the world. But we are facing a mutant virus. And we're also facing, as Christians, a militant atheism that asks us where God is in the face of it. And yet God is in control. He can use tiny viruses for his purposes, just as much as an evil army. Like Job, we may not see what he is doing, but he is working out his plans. It's good to pray that many at this time would start to think about spiritual matters and turn to God. Perhaps this is his wake-up call to the world, to make us realize how impotent we are in the face of a virus. Just as Habakkuk didn't like what he heard from God, we may not like what we see God doing, but he is just and good and in control. We can question God, but he is the king who plots the course of history. And some of these words used in this prophecy point to a problem with Babylon. The psalmist points to a right trust in God and not in chariots and horses. The Ten Commandments start with a call to worship the Lord God alone, and then move on to a just pattern of life. The Babylonians promote their own honour and make their own laws. They deride kings, they scoff at rulers. But Psalm 2 pictures the kings of the earth rising up and banding together against the Lord and his anointed one, and the Lord enthroned in heaven laughs. He scoffs at them. The Babylonians are guilty men whose own strength is their God. Habakkuk may have been wondering what on earth God was doing, but these words point to the fact that one day these Babylonians will face judgment before God. The violent and the wicked will not win in the end. Jesus died at the cross at the hands of wicked men, but he rose from the dead. They were defeated. Jesus is victorious, and so will all be who are trusting him.